Welcome again, students, to the class of investment analysis. This is your faculty, Dr. Shweta Srivastava, Associate Professor, School of Management, BBD University. So, students, in the previous lectures, we have studied what is the necessity of analyzing or researching the market data. We have understood that we cannot take investment decisions on the whims and fancies of the investor. It needs a proper analysis. If you want to mitigate the risk associated with your return investment, you need to properly, you can say, dissect the market data. Then we have studied what investment options are available for an investor, what are the various characteristics of investment options. Then in the previous lecture we have understood what is the, you can say, factors which can influence the investment decision, the international factors, the national factors, the consumer specific factors, and then finally we have understood what are the various types of risks associated with an investment. In that we have studied systematic risk and unsystematic risk. So the most important factor which decides about the investment avenue is the return associated with it. See, basically the purpose of making an investment is to get adequate return. In the previous lecture, we have understood that risk is the integral part of any investment. But if the return is adequate, if the return is high, the risk can be avoided, or you can say the risk can be compensated. So it is basically the quantity of return or the quantum of return which decides which our investment option is better. So let us understand in detail. Return. So return is basically the profit or loss. Generally, we feel that return is always positive, profit. But when I say return, return can be negative or positive. When return is positive, it means we are making profit. When return is negative, we are making loss. So return is one factor which is very influential when taking an investment decision. So first of all, we have to understand how many types of return are there. First is the initial return. This is generated at the end of the first day of trading against a share's offer price. See, if I have bought a share of 100 rupees and in the just next one day, after the passage of 24 hours only, the price rose to say 110 rupees or 105 rupees. So I will develop a faith in my investment and I will publicize that yes, I have taken a wise decision. So I'll persuade or I'll ask my relatives, my friends to invest in that option. So this is what I mean by initial return. See, it is very critical for a security or for an investment option to gain the initial return because it reinforces the faith in this particular investment option. The first faith we have showed by investing in that investment option, and once it started gaining price in just one day, that faith or that trust is reinforced, and in return what the investor does, it publicizes that particular investment option. So sorry, in a way the subscriber or the issuer gets a word of mouth publicity free of cost. The second is the periodical return. See, periodical return is nothing but the holding period return. See, it is the type of return which the investor got for holding that security for a particular period. So we have to understand one thing, that the periodical return is different from the you can say maturity return or yield to maturity, because in case of yield to maturity we are holding the instrument till the maturity of that the time, but in case of periodical return we are holding it for a particular time. Say I hold a debenture whose maturity period is 10 years. So if I am holding that debenture for complete 10 years, that will be my maturity period. But if I am reselling or trading that debenture after a lapse of 6 years, so if I calculate my return in for that particular period of 6 years, that will be known as holding period return. So in that particular period, I'll have two types of returns. One is my present income, that is the interest or You can say the coupon rate which I get. Next is the capital gain or loss in the purchase price. If I have bought the debenture at a price of 100 rupees and now the market price is 110 rupees. So 10 rupees is my capital gain. Likewise, if I have bought the debenture at 100 rupees and now the price is 90 rupees, so the 10 rupees will be considered as my capital loss. So taking both the things together, that will give you a holding price return, and this present income plus capital gain or loss will be divided by the purchase price, so that I can find out how, see, return is always calculated in the percentage. So when it will be compared to the purchase price, we will get the holding period return. So present income can be in the form of dividend, if it is a share, it can be in the form of interest, if it is a debenture, it can be in the form of rent, if I am holding a real estate property, or if I am holding a physical asset. So in all the cases, what I am comparing my present income plus capital gain, and I am comparing it with my purchase price. So basically it is a comparison between benefit and you can see benefit cost ratio. So cost is the purchase price, and the benefit which we have derived from that investment is the dividend, interest or rent plus the capital gain, or the difference in the purchase price. So now let us understand with an example. Suppose a person has made investment in two stocks, one is P or Q, over a time of one single year. Now we have to compare the result and find out which is the one with the favorable investment option. So as you can see, the purchase price of P and Q is same, that is rupees 1000 and rupees 1000. So cash dividend received is 130 in case of P, and in case of Q it is rupees 180. Sale price at the end of the year is rupees 1200 and rupees 1100. Now let us find out the holding period return. Income from P from the investment is 130, that is current income. Now income from Q is rupees 180. Now capital gain is initial price was 1000 and the sale price at the end of the year was rupees 1200. So what will be the capital gain? It is 200 in case of P. This in the same way 100 in case of Q. So what will be the total return? 130 plus 200 in case of P, 180 plus 100 in case of 280 in case of security Q. So if we compare holding period return for A, it will be 33%, as benefit is 330, cost is rupees 1000. So in total we get a return of 33%. Whereas in case of B, the total return we get is rupees 280 divided by the initial purchase price is 1000, and so it is giving us a return of 28%. So if I have to select between these two options, which one will be the better option? The P, because it is giving me return higher by you can say 5% as compared to Q. So this is how we can compare between two stocks in case of holding period return. So let us take another example. So price at the beginning of the year is rupees 60 and the price is 69. Dividend is received during the operation is rupees 250. Find out the relative return. Sorry. So capital gain is again 69 minus 60, that is rupees 9. Holding period return. So the capital gain or loss, we are having capital gain, that is of rupees 9. And what is the dividend income? Dividend income is rupees 2 rupees 40 paisa. So in total, what income we are getting from this investment? We are getting an income of 11 rupees 40 paisa. What is the initial price? That is 60 rupees. So if we take this calculation, the result come out as 19%. So if I am taking a comparative analysis, we will compare between two options, that is between the stock P and Q. But if I am holding the stock of only one company, I'll find out the return and I'll see how my investment is going on. So here I can say that yes, my investment is giving me a return of 19%. So this holding period return can be used to conduct a comparative analysis also, and for calculating the individual returns also. Now coming to another returns. See, next is terminal return. Terminal return is calculated by converting all the future earnings into the present value by using an appropriate discount rate. See, in case of terminal return, it is assumed that the investment or the you can say that instrument is held for the entire period of its life till the maturity, right? So terminal period return is done since a lot of time gap is there. We have to use the time value of money. So what is done? It is done by converting all the future earnings into the present value by using an appropriate discount rate. Now, what will be the appropriate discount return? This is the big question in front of every investor. See, appropriate discount return is basically the expected rate of return for a particular investment. As I told you earlier also that calculating an appropriate discount rate is different for different investors, because every investor has a different investment objective. But generally, we take discount rate as a cost of capital. It means, say like the prevalent market rate, the prevalent interest bank rate is basically the guiding factor in calculating your own discount rate, right? So this present value is calculated by using an adequate discount return, which generally depends on your on your investment objective and the prevailing market rate. Now next comes the terminal multi-period return. Exit multiple method and perpetuity method. This is done by Gordon's formula. This will be studying in the forthcoming slides, right? So when we are holding that instrument for n number of periods, it means when there are number of periods involved which have a different growth rate, then it will be calculated according to the terminal multi-period return, right? Now, exit multiple estimate is a fair price by multiplying financial statistics like sales, profit or EBITDA, that is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization, by a factor that is common for similar firms that are recently acquired. See what happens now let us understand the difference. See, in case of terminal return, what is happening? The company is generally having a you can say a stable growth of return. So this terminal return is calculated in the cases where the companies are stable, companies are into the operation from a longer period of time. So they have actually established themselves in the market. So their general rate of return, you can say general growth rate is stable. So in that case, we are using the appropriate one discount rate of return. But in case of terminal multi-period return, what happens? The company is new and we have to find out which discount rate is applicable on which period. So that is what I told you, that in case of multi-period return, the company faces different growth rates in that particular time periods, right? So how can we calculate the growth rate? That growth rate is calculated by multiplying with the financial statistics like sales, like profits or EBITDA, which is common for the similar firms. Similar firms means if the company is new, we cannot estimate what will be the future price. But we can compare it with the industries, the companies who are actually are already established in a particular industry. So that is how we can calculate. So in case of terminal return or terminal multi-period return, what we are doing, we are converting the future returns. So when we are calculating future returns, we have to take into consideration the time value of money. So this is how we can calculate future returns. Now let us take one example. See, ABC Limited is an unlevered firm. Unlevered firm means it does not have any interest charge on it. It means the entire capital is financed by the shares only. The cash flows before interest and taxes of the firm is rupees 500 lakhs. The cost of capital of the firm is 15%. The inflation in the market is 3%. Find out the terminal value. Assume tax rate as 40%. Now, cash flow before interest and tax is 500 lakhs. Interest during there is nil because this is written that it is an unlevered firm. It means the company does not have any interest charge. So cash flow before taxes is rupees 500 lakhs less taxes 200 lakhs. So cash flow after tax will be 300 lakhs. So growth is 3%. And weighted average cost of capital is 15%. Here weighted average cost is same as the cost of capital. Cost of capital means you can say the estimated rate or required rate of return expected from the company. or you can say the cost of capital is the prevailing market rate in that for that particular company. So growth rate is 3%. It is again given in the question. So the inflation in this market is 3%. So how can we calculate? The terminal value is the free cash flow multiplied by 1 plus growth factor divided by weighted average cost of capital minus growth. See, now you have to understand this thing. See, free cash flow is the cash flow which is actually available for the shareholders, right? Now it will grow this factor will grow with with what percent? 3%, right? Now the cost of capital is 15%, but the inflation rate is 3%. So what will happen? The required rate is reduced by 3% because of inflationary trend, right? So the resultant will be 12%. So what will be the terminal value for this investment in 500 lakhs? There will be 25 lakhs 75 25705 lakhs, right? So this is the amount, the terminal value for an investment made in the company ABC amounting to rupees 500 lakhs. See, we have to here which two factors are taken into consideration? The required rate of return and the inflation. So both the factors are given due importance. So growth basically you can say is the rate which decides the rate, you can say increase in the firm value, and weighted average cost of capital is basically the return which is expected from the company, right? So if the company is already growing by 3% and 15% is the expected, so what is again which is yet to be attained by the company is 12%, right? So this is what is the meaning of weighted average cost minus growth, right? So this is how we can calculate the terminal value of an established company. Now, we have to understand the relationship between risk and return. So, in the previous lecture, I have discussed with you that it is not only the risk which can you can say guide you in taking the right decision. It is not only the return which can guide you in taking the right decision. In fact, it is the balance between risk and return which can guide you in taking the right investment decision. So you can say we know that risk and return are directly proportional to each other. So higher the risk, higher will be the return, right? So here it is written as a standard deviation. As I told you, what is risk? Risk is basically the variability in the returns. It means the variability in the expected return and actual return. So more it is the deviation, higher will be the risk. So we can see that the risk and return have a direct relationship. The more the risk, the higher will be the return. So now let us understand the risk return relationship in different investment avenues. Now, so we know that at the very beginning we have bank deposit, that is lowest risk. It has lowest risk FDs. We have a fixed rate of interest in those bank deposits. It's the prevailing rate of interest is generally 6.5% to 7%. For senior citizens, it is 1% higher. So this bank deposit is actually risk free, but still it is again it has risk. We have seen the example of PNB, we have seen the example of Yes Bank. So you cannot say that FDs are not risk free. In fact, we have seen the history of Lehman Brothers in America. See, it is the lesson which has been taken from Lehman Brothers and the recession which it triggered in America that India took, and that is why it came as a support to Yes Bank, right? So you can never say that bank deposits are risk free. They have lowest risk, but still they have the default or the insolvency risk. So the first is the bank deposit risk. Next is the public sector bonds. These are government bonds. First of all, since they are bonds, they have a fixed rate of interest. They do not have any fluctuating return. So they are a secure instrument, but still they still suffer from market risk. They still suffer from default or insolvency risk, which we have discussed in the previous lecture. So that is again your public sector bonds. When we go high in the ladder, we have corporate bonds, bonds of you can say private companies. Like debentures of Reliance, debentures of Infosys, debentures of Coca-Cola. So these are corporate bonds. So, but since they have fixed interest charge, people assume that they are not risky, but still they suffer from the same risk like market risk, default risk, business risk. So you cannot say yes, the degree of risk is lower in case of corporate bonds as compared to equity and mutual funds. Now coming to mutual funds, as the name says, mutual fund is basically a fund. You can say a consortium of different equities, right? So these equities are invested in different industries. Those are generally not correlated with each other. So basically this mutual fund is developed on the concept of internal hedging, and it follows the same principle: do not put all the eggs in one basket. So instead of investing the entire money in one company, what this fund does, this invest money in the diversified companies which are generally not correlated to each other. See students, you have already understood the meaning of correlation or the correlation index, right? So these are the industries which are not correlated. It means if there is a downfall in one industry, that will not affect the another industry. Now I'm taking one example of real estate industry. We know that real estate industry is into troubles. So since cement industry, brick industry, the paint industry, these are closely correlated with the real estate industry. So there is no point in investing in real estate industry at one point of time, paint industry in another point of time, and we are assuming that we are diversifying our risk. In fact, we are not diversifying, we are investing in the same type of companies which are correlated to each other. So if real estate industry is into problem, these industries will be automatically get affected. So mutual fund is a type of fund which is created by those companies which are not correlated, so that we have a process of internal hedging and the diversification, right? So mutual funds, but still their money is invested in the equity. So they have a risk, but because of internal hedging, the percentage of risk is lesser as compared to pure equity. Now comes the pure equity. This is the highest, you can say, the approximate highest level where you can invest money. So you know that you are putting all the eggs in one basket, so you are exposing yourself to a much high level of risk. So equity, most of the people suffer because they are investing in equity. So if you are investing in equity, you should do proper research and analysis so that you can mitigate or you can avoid that risk. Fine. So next comes the venture capital funds. So venture capital funds are those funds which carry a highest degree of risk. As the name suggests, venture cap funds are those funds which are untested region. The funds, these are the industries where you don't have any history to track the record. So whenever you are investing in a new business, it basically is your venture fund, right? So like the Jio, which was like there are so many venture capital companies who are actually investing in those areas where there is no history. There you can say there's a complete dark to assess the future, right? So venture cap funds are the highest risk zones. So generally a common man doesn't invest in venture funds. It is the big corporates or the big banks, merchant banks, which invest in venture funds. So for a common man, the ladder goes like that. From the continuum is from lowest to highest: the bank deposit, then public sector bonds, then corporate bonds, then mutual funds, then equity. In between we have insurance policies. In between we have real estate, and in between we have national saving certificates. We have in between we have Kisan Vikas Patra. These we have post office schemes which will come below this public sector bonds, because again these are the secure instruments, post office instruments, the schemes like monthly investment schemes. So these schemes come below public sector bonds, but they are above bank deposit. So why they are above bank deposit? Because sometimes see, I have myself have confronted this situation that post office doesn't have that adequate money to give according to that MIS. So but still it is a secure instrument, because as some or the other day you are going to get your money back, right? So this is the ladder which a common man sees from his perspective. So that depends on the investment option depends upon your risk appetite, the type of risk you can endure. So generally a common man goes with either the FDs, the conservative people will go with the bank deposit, and those who are risk takers, they will either go for equity or mutual funds. So mutual funds have yet another example, that is they can be used for tax saving. The same goes with the debentures also, but equity they are lesser exposed to tax benefits. So students, that is all for today. We'll meet in the next lecture, and we'll understand what are the base, you can say, the investment pattern for the average household, and how we can calculate the value of a firm, value of a share, value of a debenture. So students, thank you for now. Hope you have a good day. Thank you.